Dreams and lies. When I first opened the cozy cup, I thought I was building a life, a future, with the man I loved. Ethan and I had poured everything we had into this place. I handled the recipes, the branding, and the customer connections, while Ethan, with his knack for numbers, managed the finances. Or so I thought. The cafe was more than just a business. It was my sanctuary. Every morning I'd wake up before sunrise, savor the quiet while prepping fresh scones and pastries, and watch the sun filter through the windows as the aroma of coffee filled the air. I loved it, and I loved the life I thought Ethan and I were creating. We make such a great team, don't we? I'd often say, smiling as I wiped down the counter after a long day. Ethan would give me that half-hearted smile, muttering a distracted, "Yeah, of course." Lately, though, that smile felt off, less genuine, like a mask he wore, because he thought I was too naive to notice. The night it all changed. It was a Thursday evening, and I was pulling a late shift prepping for the upcoming spring artisan market, the biggest event in town. Ethan had invited his friends, Daniel, Jake, and Thomas, over for a few beers. Their laughter echoed from the living room while I whisked batter in the kitchen, half tuned into their conversation. And that's when I heard it. "Man, I don't know how you do it, Ethan," Daniel said, his voice dripping with amusement. "She thinks she's running the show," Jake chimed in, chuckling. "But you've got it all under control, right?" Thomas added with a knowing smirk. I paused, my whisk hovering in midair. "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Olivia's obsessed with that damn cafe. She doesn't even notice how much I've been moving around behind her back." My heart plummeted. You really think she'd ever guess I've been funneling the profits? By the time she figures it out, I'll be long gone. The batter in my bowl was forgotten. My pulse pounded in my ears. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved for nearly a decade, was planning to walk away, leaving me with nothing but crumbs. I stood there, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. "They really think I won't notice?" I whispered under my breath, a dangerous calm settling over me. I didn't storm into the living room. I didn't throw the bowl or confront him right there. No. I learned long ago that the best revenge is served with patience. Let's see who outsmarts who, Ethan. Behind closed doors, I didn't confront Ethan that night. No shouting, no dramatic accusations, just silence. If I'd learned anything from running a cafe, it's that timing is everything. Pull a cake out of the oven too soon, and it collapses. Wait just the right amount of time, and you get something perfect. So, I played my part. I smiled when he walked into the kitchen the next morning, acting like I hadn't just overheard him plotting my downfall. "Morning," I murmured, sliding a plate of fresh croissants toward him. Ethan grunted in response, barely looking up from his phone. His attention was elsewhere, on something or someone more important than me. But that was fine. I needed him distracted. I needed him to believe I was still that trusting, oblivious wife who thought he was her partner in everything. "Not yet, Ethan," I told myself silently. "You'll get what's coming. Just wait." Following the breadcrumbs, the first cracks appeared a few days later. I started noticing how Ethan guarded his phone like it was a state secret. He used to leave it lying around the house, but now it was either in his pocket or charging face down. Curiosity turned to suspicion. I casually mentioned needing to check something on his phone, a recipe link I'd sent him weeks ago. "Oh, I deleted that," Ethan mumbled, avoiding eye contact. That was lie number one. Then there were the late nights. He claimed he was meeting with potential investors to discuss expanding the Cozy Cup to another location. But why would investors be texting him at 2 a.m.? And why did these business meetings leave him smelling like expensive cologne and cheap excuses? Lie number two. I wasn't going to ask him anymore. I was going to find out for myself. The digital trail one quiet afternoon while Ethan was out, I sat down with his old laptop, the one he rarely used now. Thankfully, the man never changed his passwords. Amateur mistake. "Let's see what you've been hiding, darling." My fingers flew across the keyboard, digging through emails, bank statements, and message threads. And there it was. Multiple transfers, $300 share, $500 steer, small enough not to raise red flags but frequent enough to catch my eye. He'd been siphoning money into a separate account for almost a year. Secret emails, correspondence with a real estate agent about a new living arrangement. A one-bedroom loft downtown, cozy, sleek, perfect for a fresh start without me. Texts with Samantha, The messages were vague but intimate. Late-night conversations, flirty emojis, and way too many references to "can't wait to see you again, Samantha." The name echoed in my head as I stared at the screen. I felt a wave of nausea rise, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to fall apart. Not yet. The smoking gun, what really sealed it though. A credit card statement, one I had never seen before, opened under my name. The balance, over $12,000. Designer clothes I didn't buy. Weekend getaways I never went on. Expensive dinners I never tasted. "Oh, Ethan," I whispered, my lips curling into a cold smile. "You didn't just cheat on me. You stole from me." Calling in reinforcements the first needed backup. I couldn't do this alone. That's where Bella came in. She wasn't just a friend. She was my ride or die. We'd been through everything together since culinary school. She was the one who pushed me to open the cozy cup in the first place. When I told her what I'd found, her reaction was exactly what I expected. "That son of a bitch," she muttered, eyes narrowing as she scrolled through the screenshots I'd sent her. "You're not going down without a fight, Liv." "Oh, I'm not going down at all." I met her gaze, a fire igniting in my chest. "I'm going to burn his world to the ground." The plan begins. Over the next few days, I wore the mask perfectly. I laughed at Ethan's jokes, kissed him goodnight, and thanked him for working so hard for us. But beneath that facade, I was calculating every move. Let him think he's winning, I told myself. Let him get comfortable, because when the time was right, I was going to flip the script. And Ethan, he wouldn't even see it coming. Patience is a weapon. You know what they say about revenge. It's best served cold. But what they don't tell you is how satisfying it is to watch it simmer first. For the next few weeks, I became the perfect wife. I smiled at Ethan's lame jokes, acted impressed when he talked about his business meetings, and kissed him goodbye as he left for his late-night rendezvous with Samantha. Let him think I'm clueless. Let him feel safe. But behind closed doors, I was building an arsenal. Laying the groundwork, Bella was my first line of defense. She wasn't just my best friend. She was a strategist. We spent late nights going over every document, cross-checking financial statements, and compiling a portfolio that would make any divorce lawyer salivate. "We need a clean narrative," Bella said one night, her eyes scanning the spreadsheets. "Ethan's been skimming money, setting up a new life, and using your name to rack up debt. But we need more." I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion tugging at my limbs. But the fire in my chest refused to die. "We'll get it," and we did. Financial statements, every suspicious transfer documented, email logs, screenshots of his conversations with Samantha, credit card records, proof that Ethan had used my identity to open a secret account, real estate correspondence. His new bachelor pad was almost ready. I didn't just have evidence. I had a goddamn war chest. Playing the role to Ethan, I was still Olivia, the loving, oblivious wife. I kept his favorite IPA stocked in the fridge, planned date nights he'd conveniently cancel, and made sure I was too busy at the cafe to notice his disappearing acts. But every canceled date, another night to gather intel. Every late business meeting, more time to move my assets. While Ethan was busy living a double life, I was preparing to cut him out of mine. Securing my future one wasn't about to let Ethan walk away with everything I built, so I moved first. Joint account transfers, bit by bit, I funneled money into a new account, one Ethan didn't know existed. Legally, I was entitled to half, but I wasn't taking chances. Ownership papers. The first had the cafe registered solely under my name. Bella's lawyer cousin, Samantha. A different one, thank God. Made sure the paperwork was airtight. Revised partnership agreement. Ethan thought he had a stake in the cafe. Turns out, he only had what I let him believe. Thanks to a little update in the agreement, his name was nowhere near the ownership anymore. "He's going to lose everything," I murmured to myself, watching the numbers shift in my favor. Locking him out, Ethan had no clue that while he was planning to leave me, I was building walls he couldn't climb. Access revoked. I changed the passwords to all the business accounts and POS systems at the Cozy Cup. Ethan didn't have access to anything that mattered. Credit card freeze. I reported the fraudulent credit card to the company, ensuring any charges under my name were flagged and frozen. New security system. Bella's brother installed a new security system at the cafe, complete with motion sensors and cameras Ethan wouldn't know existed. By the time I was done, Ethan's control over my life was an illusion. Setting the trap, the final step, letting Ethan dig his own grave. I encouraged him to invest more in the cafe, knowing full well I'd already secured everything. We should renovate the patio before summer, I suggested sweetly one night. It'll bring in more traffic. Good idea, he murmured absent-mindedly, barely looking up from his phone. I watched him text with Samantha and smiled. Spend all you want, Ethan. It's not your money anymore. The perfect timing, the spring artisan market was approaching, the biggest event of the year. Vendors, investors, and loyal customers would flood the streets. The Cozy Cup was a cornerstone of the community, and this event was the perfect stage for my grand finale. I needed Ethan distracted, and what better way than by letting him think he was winning? I suggested he take charge of organizing our booth, giving him just enough rope to hang himself. You've been working so hard, I cooed, touching his arm one evening. Maybe you should handle this one. You know, take the lead. His ego wouldn't let him refuse. Sure, babe, I got this. Perfect. The catalyst, a little push a week before the event. I accidentally left my laptop open with an email thread about a potential investor. It was bait, and Ethan bit hard. What's this? He asked casually, his eyes narrowing. I played it cool. Oh, just some early interest in expanding. Nothing solid yet. Hook, line, sinker. The next few days, Ethan was more attentive. He was invested again, which meant he was exactly where I wanted him. The final piece. The day before the market, I met with Bella and her lawyer cousin to finalize the divorce papers. Every I was dotted, every T crossed. All I needed was for Ethan to play his part. One last time. Tomorrow, I whispered, my reflection staring back at me in the mirror. Tomorrow, it ends. Curtains up. Ethan, the spring artisan market was the crown jewel of our little town. Vendors lined the streets. The scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee hung in the air, and families strolled through the bustling crowds. The Cozy Cup's booth was front and center. Prime real estate, all thanks to my reputation and loyal customer base. Ethan, he was basking in the spotlight, thinking this was his moment to shine. Smile for the cameras, darling, I murmured under my breath, watching him shake hands and pose for photos like the self-proclaimed business genius he thought he was. Little did he know, this was the beginning of his public execution. Stage set, players ready. Bella and I had worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in place. Copies of financial records, ready to be emailed to our lawyer and key investors. Screenshots of texts and emails. Ethan's sweet nothings to Samantha were compiled in a neat PDF. Proof of the secret account, documented and ready for exposure. Bella stood by, pretending to be engrossed in her conversation with a customer. But I saw her glance at me every few minutes, waiting for the signal. You ready for this? She'd asked me earlier. I've never been more ready, I replied, my voice steady but my heart pounding like a drum. The moment arrives by midday. The crowd was at its peak. The market was buzzing, and Ethan was lapping up the attention. I watched as he talked animatedly with potential investors, spinning tales about our upcoming expansion and new opportunities. Lie all you want, Ethan, I thought, but you're about to choke on every single one of them. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for. Ethan stepped onto the small stage near our booth, ready to give his grand speech. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, flashing his charming smile that made me sick to my stomach. Thank you for coming out today. It's an honor to be part of this incredible community. He went on about our shared journey and how the Cozy Cup's success was because of our partnership. Partnership? I almost laughed out loud. The interruption right as he was about to announce his big plans for the future, I stepped forward. Actually, Ethan, I said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, I think it's time everyone knows the truth. A hush fell over the crowd. Ethan froze, his eyes narrowing. Olivia? He forced a smile, but I could see the panic flashing behind his eyes. What are you doing? Just setting the record straight, I said calmly, stepping onto the stage beside him. Since we're talking about partnerships, I think our friends and loyal customers deserve to know what's really been going on behind the scenes. Ethan's smile faltered. Now's not the time. Oh, it's exactly the time, I cut him off, turning to the audience. You see, while I've been pouring my heart and soul into the Cozy Cup, Ethan's been busy. Well, let's just say his attention has been elsewhere. Evidence on display with a nod to Bella, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The large projector, meant to showcase photos of the cafe's journey, suddenly displayed something very different. Bank statements showing consistent withdrawals into a secret account. Emails between Ethan and a real estate agent about his new loft downtown. Texts with Samantha. Late-night conversations filled with "can't wait to see you again" and "our future together." Gasps echoed through the crowd. "Oh, and just in case anyone's wondering," I added, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "Samantha isn't a business associate." Ethan's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. "Olivia," he hissed, stepping toward me. "We can talk about this privately." "Oh no, Ethan." I met his gaze, fire blazing in my eyes. "You wanted to play this out in public, remember? All those fake smiles and charming lies? Well, now we're doing it my way. The financial bombshell." I wasn't done. "And since we're airing dirty laundry," I continued, "let's talk about the fraudulent credit card in my name." Another gasp. "Oh yes, everyone. Ethan didn't just cheat on me, he stole from me." I pulled out the statement showing over $12,000 in charges. Designer clothes, weekend getaways, and oh look fine, dining at all the places I never got to go. The murmurs grew louder. Investors whispered to each other. Customers exchanged shocked glances. And you know what's funny? I smiled sweetly, feeling the adrenaline course through my veins. None of this would have come to light if Ethan hadn't been so eager to expand the cozy cup. Ethan's world crumbles. Ethan's confidence cracked like glass. "Olivia," he whispered, eyes darting around as he realized the gravity of the situation. "Please, we can fix this." "Fix it?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "With what, Ethan? Lies? Deception? Or maybe Samantha can help us brainstorm." His jaw clenched, but there was nothing left for him to say. I turned back to the crowd. "I've already taken the necessary legal steps," I announced. "As of now, Ethan has no stake in the cozy cup. Every penny he stole is being accounted for, and he'll be answering for his actions in court." Ethan's shoulders slumped, the weight of his downfall crushing him in real time. The final blow, but I wasn't done. "And one last thing," I added, turning toward him with a satisfied smirk. "That loft you were planning to move into? The contract fell through." His head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" "You really shouldn't use the same lawyer for your shady deals and joint accounts, Ethan." I shrugged, enjoying the look of utter defeat on his face. Aftermath. Karma served hot. The applause started slowly, a few claps, hesitant but supportive. Then it grew, rippling through the crowd like wildfire. "That's my girl," Bella murmured from the sidelines, giving me a proud nod. "Ethan?" He slinked off the stage, avoiding eye contact, his perfect life crumbling around him. I stood there, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders for the first time in months. Game over, Ethan. Rebuilding from the ashes. When the dust settled after Ethan's very public downfall at the spring artisan market, I expected to feel empty, but I didn't. I felt free. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending. No more smiling through the pain, while Ethan drained me emotionally, financially, and mentally. The weight I'd been carrying for months was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. "This is what peace feels like," I murmured to myself as I stood outside the cozy cup the morning after the market. The cafe was quiet, the kind of calm that usually follows a storm. But this wasn't the silence of something broken. It was the quiet before a rebirth, taking back control. The first thing I did was take back my space. The cozy cup had always been mine. I was the one who built it from scratch, who poured my heart into every cup of coffee and every bite of pastry. And now, it was finally back where it belonged. I spent the next week making changes, small things that felt symbolic but necessary. New paint, new energy. I repainted the walls a warm, inviting shade of mocha, replacing the cool grays Ethan had insisted on to make the space look more modern. Revamped menu. I brought back the community favorites that Ethan had pushed aside for trendier, overpriced options. Goodbye quinoa bowls. Hello, cinnamon scones. Staff meeting. I gathered my team and assured them that things were going back to the way they should be. A place where people felt at home, not just another Instagrammable spot. We're here to serve the community, I told them, my voice steady and sure, not to impress Ethan's investor buddies. The relief on their faces told me everything I needed to know. Officially done legally, things wrapped up faster than I expected. Ethan's lawyer must have realized they didn't have a leg to stand on because the divorce was finalized within 6 weeks. No alimony. Despite his pathetic attempts to argue that he sacrificed his career for our marriage, assets split in my favor. Thanks to Bella's cousin's airtight legal work, the Cozy Cup and all associated properties were awarded to me. Restitution. Ethan was legally required to repay every cent he siphoned from our accounts. Poetic justice, Bella said with a grin when the final papers were signed. Ethan? He slinked away like the coward he was. Last I heard, Samantha had dumped him when his perfect future evaporated. Apparently, starting fresh wasn't so appealing when you're broke and disgraced. Finding myself again, but this part of the story, it wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about me. I'd spent so much time trying to keep my marriage afloat that I'd forgotten who I was outside of it. But with Ethan gone, I had room to breathe, to explore, to rediscover myself. Small steps, big changes, morning runs. I started running again, something I hadn't done since college. It cleared my mind and gave me a sense of control over my body and my life. Cooking for pleasure, not obligation, I experimented in the kitchen again, not just to please customers, but because I loved creating. Weekend trips. I took a few solo weekend trips to nearby towns, exploring small cafes and drawing inspiration for the Cozy Cup's future. New vision for the Cozy Cup with Ethan out of the picture. I could finally focus on growing the Cozy Cup the way I'd always envisioned. Local partnerships. I collaborated with local farmers and artisans to source fresh ingredients and bring a farm-to-table feel to the cafe. Community nights. I introduced open mic nights and book club Sundays, turning the Cozy Cup into a hub for creativity and connection. Expanding the brand, I explored the possibility of opening a second location in the neighboring town, on my own terms. This isn't just a cafe, I told Bella one evening as we sipped wine on my newly redecorated patio. It's a reflection of who I am, and I'm finally ready to let it grow. Ethan's inevitable fallout. Of course, small towns love gossip, and I couldn't escape the occasional. Did you hear about Ethan? Apparently, his big comeback never happened. Samantha ghosted him. Once his money dried up, so did her affection. No investors would touch him. Word spread fast about his public humiliation and financial mishandling. His new business? A joke. He tried to open a high-end coffee bar downtown. It lasted 6 months before closing its doors. Karma really is a bitch, Bella had said when we heard the news. I didn't even feel satisfaction, just indifference. Ethan was no longer a part of my world, and that was the best revenge of all. New beginnings, new love? I wasn't in a rush to jump back into the dating scene. I needed time to heal, to rebuild, to enjoy my newfound freedom. But life has a funny way of surprising you. Enter Alex. I met Alex at one of the Cozy Cup's first open mic nights. He was charming in an understated way, nothing flashy, no pretense, just real. So, you're the famous Olivia? He said with a warm smile after his set. I've heard a lot about this place. I smiled back, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. All good things, I hope, only the best. Taking it slow, Alex was different. He wasn't trying to impress me or control me. He respected my space, my independence, and my need to take things one step at a time. We started off slow. Coffee dates, long walks, sharing stories about our pasts. There was no pressure, no expectations, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. Looking ahead, as I stood outside the Cozy Cup one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold, I realized something. I'm not just surviving anymore, I whispered to myself. I'm thriving. Ethan was a chapter I'd closed. My future? It was wide open, waiting for me to write the next page. Story 2. The heat was unbearable that afternoon, thick, sticky air that clung to my skin, making it hard to breathe. I was 18, barely out of high school, and had no clue that my life was about to shatter. My mom, Karen, called me into the living room, her tone unusually firm. The room felt suffocating, the air heavy with something unspoken. I stood there, uneasy, as she wrung her hands, her eyes fixed somewhere just beyond me. Ryan. Her voice was tight, almost rehearsed. Things are going to change. I felt my stomach twist. I knew something was coming, but I wasn't prepared for what she said next. David and his kids are moving in. We don't have the space. You're old enough to figure things out. It hit me like a freight train. David, her boyfriend of less than a year, and his 2 obnoxious kids were moving in, and I was being kicked out to make room for them. My mouth went dry, and my pulse pounded in my ears. "You're kidding," I whispered, hoping I'd misheard. "Where am I supposed to go?" Her expression hardened. The woman who once held me through nightmares, now a stranger. "You'll manage," she said, her voice cool, detached. And just like that, I was discarded. Hours later, I stood in my tiny bedroom, my only refuge since Dad died 5 years ago. I shoved clothes into a worn duffel bag, my hands trembling. My eyes lingered on a framed photo of Dad, his easy smile frozen in time. Tears blurred my vision as I packed it carefully, the weight of his absence crushing me all over again. By dawn, I was gone, the front door slamming shut behind me. I had no plan, no safety net, just a duffel bag and a heart shredded by betrayal. I crashed on friends' couches, living off scraps and dead-end jobs that barely kept me afloat. I scrubbed greasy counters at a dingy diner, my shifts dragging into the dead of night. The pay was pathetic, but it kept me alive. Every night, I'd lie awake, staring at cracked ceilings, her words echoing in my head. "You'll manage." I wasn't managing, I was barely surviving, but something inside me refused to break. The pain, the rejection, it sparked something deeper, a fire. I promised myself I wouldn't just manage. I'd rise. I'd build something unbreakable. Not for her, not to prove anything to her, but for me. Weeks turned into months, and I scraped together enough to rent a closet-sized apartment. The walls were paper thin, and the heat was unreliable, but it was mine. No Greg, no step-siblings treating me like a ghost. Just me and my ambition. I enrolled in night classes at a community college. My days spent flipping burgers and my nights buried in textbooks. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, but I didn't care. Every class, every test was a step closer to the life I was building. I landed an unpaid internship at a small marketing firm. At first, it was just coffee runs and grunt work, but I soaked up everything like a sponge. I watched, I learned, and I stayed late, tinkering with campaigns after everyone else had gone home. My boss, Sarah, a no-nonsense woman who could smell weakness a mile away, noticed. "You've got fire, Ryan," she said one evening, tossing me a real project. "Don't waste it." I didn't. I poured everything into it. Sleepless nights, blending into days of relentless effort. And when the client loved the campaign, I felt that flicker of defiance from the day I was kicked out grow into something stronger. Years passed in a relentless blur of ambition and grit. I clawed my way up from intern to junior executive and eventually launched my own agency. Word spread, clients multiplied, and before I knew it, my name was on the door of a sleek office overlooking the city. I'd built it from nothing, no handouts, no safety net, just raw determination. I stood in my loft one evening, watching the city lights flicker below. The life I'd built was a testament to every sleepless night, every tear I'd shed, and every ounce of pain I'd turned into fuel. But I had no idea that the past I'd fought so hard to escape was about to come knocking again. And this time, I'd be ready. Part 2. The reckoning begins. It started with a missed call. I almost ignored it, but something about the unknown number made me pause. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity gnawed at me. When I finally played the message, her voice crawled through the line, sweet, syrupy, and so damn familiar. "Ryan, it's me. I heard you're doing well. We should talk. Call me when you can." My grip on the phone tightened. It had been nearly a decade since Karen had thrown me out without a second thought. Now, here she was, slithering back into my life like nothing had happened. I didn't call back. I couldn't, but she wasn't one to give up easily. The next day, my phone buzzed with a text. "Ryan, please. It's about David's kids. They're struggling with tuition. You can help." My jaw clenched, anger simmering just beneath the surface. The audacity. She'd tossed me aside for those kids, and now she wanted me to finance their futures? I didn't respond, but she didn't stop. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. "Ryan, their family. They deserve a chance. Dad would have wanted you to help." That one hit like a punch to the gut. Using Dad's memory against me, that was a low I hadn't expected, but I should have. Karen had always been good at manipulating emotions. But I wasn't that scared. desperate kid anymore. I blocked her number, but she found other ways, emails from new addresses. Even a letter slipped under my door. We need to talk, face to face. I knew ignoring her wouldn't make her go away, so I agreed to meet. We met at a cafe downtown, a neutral ground where I could keep my composure. She walked in, looking older but just as calculating. Her smile was tight, her eyes scanning me like she was trying to figure out who I'd become. "I'm so proud of you, Ryan," she began, her voice thick with feigned warmth. "Look at everything you've accomplished." My stomach turned at the false praise, but I let her talk. She didn't waste time getting to the point. David's kids were struggling with tuition. "You could make such a difference," she pressed, her tone dripping with entitlement. I let her words hang in the air, watching her squirm in the silence. "You don't get it, do you?" I finally said, my voice low and steady. "You threw me out, Karen. I was a kid, and you left me to fend for myself. And now, you want me to pay for their future?" Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear behind her practiced smile. "I didn't mean it like that." "No," I cut her off, leaning forward. "You made your choice, and I made mine. I built this life without you, and you don't get to touch it." Her face paled, her mask of control slipping. "You're heartless," she whispered. I stood, towering over her. "No, Karen, I'm done." I walked out, leaving her in stunned silence. But something told me this wasn't over. Karen never gave up easily, and I had a feeling she wasn't finished trying to worm her way back in. But this time, I was ready for whatever she threw at me. Part 3. The final blow. 2 days later, another email arrived. This one was different, short, cold, and to the point. "I can't believe you would turn your back on family like this. You'll regret this, Ryan." Regret? I'd spent years carrying the weight of her betrayal, and now she dared to lecture me about regret? The irony was almost laughable, but I wasn't laughing. I blocked her latest email and poured myself into work, but Karen wasn't done. A week later, I received another letter. This one slipped under my office door. "We need to talk, face to face." I should have ignored it, but part of me wanted closure, so I agreed to meet her one last time. This time, I chose the place, a sleek conference room in my office. I wanted her to see the empire I'd built without her. When she walked in, her eyes darted around, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern furniture, and the sleek logo on the wall. "You've done well," she murmured, her voice almost impressed. But I wasn't interested in her approval. "Why are you here, Karen?" I asked, my tone cold and businesslike. She launched into her spiel again, but I stopped her mid-sentence. "I'm not giving you a dime," I said flatly. "You made your bed. Lie in it." Her composure cracked, her face twisting with frustration. "You'll regret this, Ryan," she hissed, her mask slipping. "Maybe," I said, leaning back, a calm smile tugging at the corner of my mouth, "but not as much as you'll regret throwing me out." I stood, signaling that the meeting was over. She stared at me, realizing she had no more cards to play. As she walked out, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The final thread binding me to her had snapped. I was free. Back in my loft that evening, I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker below. The weight of the past was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. Karen had tried to claw her way back in, but I'd shut the door for good. This time, it was my turn to walk away, and I wasn't looking back. It started with a missed call. At first, I almost ignored it, an unknown number buzzing on my phone late in the evening. Probably spam, I thought, but something about it made me pause. Curiosity won out, and I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I played the message, and her voice came through, crackling and sickly sweet. "Ryan, it's me." I froze. That voice. It was Karen. "I heard you're doing well," she continued, her tone dripping with the same false warmth I used to fall for. "We should talk. Call me when you can." I stood there, phone in hand, the room around me fading into the background. It had been nearly 10 years since she threw me out like yesterday's garbage. And now, out of the blue, she wanted to talk? My grip tightened on the phone. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. No, I wasn't the scared, desperate kid she had abandoned anymore. I was someone else now, someone who had clawed his way up from nothing, and I wasn't about to let her slither back into my life. I deleted the voicemail and shoved the phone into my pocket. But Karen wasn't one to take silence as an answer. The next day, a text popped up. "Karen, Ryan, please. It's about David's kids. They're struggling with tuition. You can help." My stomach twisted. David, of course. The man she'd chosen over her own son. The man whose spoiled brats had smirked at me as I hauled my life out the front door. And now, she wanted me to help them? I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could feel the old anger bubbling up, that familiar ache in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. Don't respond. I locked the phone and threw it on the counter. But Karen wasn't done. A few hours later, another text. Karen, Ryan, they're family. They deserve a chance. Family. That word stung like salt on an open wound. I remembered all the times I'd begged for her attention, only to be met with cold indifference. I was family too once, but that hadn't stopped her from choosing them over me. I ignored that message too, but Karen was persistent, and she knew exactly how to twist the knife. 2 days later, another message came through. Karen, your father would have wanted you to help. That one? That one hit differently, dragging Dad into this. Using his memory to manipulate me? My hands shook as I read the words over and over, my throat tight with emotion. Dad had been everything to me. When he died, I was the one who held on to his memory, while she had moved on, erased him from her life as if he'd never existed. And now she dared to invoke his name? I blocked her number. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt unsettled. Karen wasn't one to give up. And I was right. A letter at my door 2 weeks passed in blissful silence. I poured myself into work, throwing everything into expanding my agency. New clients, bigger projects, it was everything I had dreamed of. I was finally living the life I had built on my own terms. Then, one evening, I came home late, my mind still buzzing with ideas from a strategy meeting. But as I unlocked the door to my loft, I noticed something on the floor, a letter. My name was scrawled across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Karen. I stood there for a moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to toss it straight into the trash, but something stopped me. I don't know if it was curiosity or some lingering thread of obligation, but I picked it up and tore it open. We need to talk, face to face. No explanation, no apology, just a demand. My first instinct was to burn it and forget she ever reached out. But something told me that ignoring her wouldn't make her go away. Karen was like a bad rash, persistent and impossible to shake. If I didn't confront her now, she'd keep finding ways to worm herself back into my life. So, I texted her from a burner number I used for work, keeping it short. Me, Saturday, 3 p.m. Cafe on 5th, 1 hour. She replied almost instantly. Karen, thank you, sweetie. Sweetie. The word made my skin crawl, but I didn't respond. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. Face to face with the past Saturday came too fast. The cafe was small, tucked into a quiet corner of downtown neutral ground. I arrived early, needing a few moments to steady myself. I ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, my mind already bracing for the storm that was about to walk through the door. Right on cue, she arrived. Karen, she looked older, lines etched deeper around her eyes, her blonde hair touched with streaks of gray. But the calculating glint in her eyes, that was still there. The same woman who had thrown me away without hesitation. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ryan, she said softly, as if we were long-lost family reuniting. I didn't smile back. Karen, she slid into the seat across from me, her eyes flicking around the cafe. This is nice, she murmured, her tone too casual. But I wasn't here for pleasantries. Why am I here? I asked, cutting straight to the point. Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. I've missed you, she said, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. Cut the crap, Karen, I said, my tone flat. What do you want? The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, and I saw the real her, the one who always had an angle. It's about David's kids, she said, her voice taking on that pleading edge. They're struggling. College is expensive, and, well, you're doing so well now. You could make such a difference. I leaned back, crossing my arms, my expression unreadable. You want me to pay for their tuition? They're family, Ryan, she said softly, her eyes wide with faux sincerity. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before I spoke. No, Karen, I said, my voice calm but firm. I was family too, but that didn't stop you from throwing me out, did it? Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw real fear flicker in her eyes. Ryan, I didn't mean, no, I cut her off, my tone ice cold. You made your choice. You chose them. And now, you want me to clean up after the mess you created? Her lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand. It's different now, is it? I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. Where was that concern when I was sleeping on friends' couches? When I was working double shifts just to afford a place to live? Where was family then? Her silence spoke volumes. You don't get to waltz back into my life and expect me to fix your mistakes, I said, my voice steady. I built this life on my own, and you? You don't get a piece of it. Her face crumpled, her carefully crafted facade falling apart. You're heartless, she whispered, but I could see the anger behind her words. No, Karen, I said, standing up. I'm done. I left her sitting there, her pleas fading into the background as I walked out into the cool afternoon air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. This time, I was in control. And Karen? She was just a ghost from a past I had long since outgrown. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen wasn't the type to slink away quietly. And when she came back, and I knew she would, I'd be ready. Because this time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And I'd be damned if I let her take that away from me. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. After walking out of that cafe, leaving Karen sitting there with her crocodile tears and empty words, I felt lighter, like I'd finally shed the weight I'd carried for years. But Karen, she wasn't one to give up that easily. I should have known better. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again. An email. Subject: you'll regret this. I almost laughed when I saw it. The sheer audacity. I opened it, my curiosity getting the better of me. I can't believe you would turn your back on family like this. We're struggling, Ryan. David's kids don't deserve to suffer because of your stubbornness. You'll regret this one day. My jaw clenched, but I didn't let the anger take hold. I'd been down that road before, and I wasn't going back. I deleted the email without replying. She wasn't worth a response. But Karen was like a weed. You cut her down, and she just found another way to creep back in. A week later, I came home late from a client dinner, exhausted and ready to crash. As I turned the corner to my loft, I noticed a shadow near my door. Karen. My heart dropped. She was standing there, a manila envelope in her hand, her eyes darting around nervously. What the hell are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice steady as I approached. She turned, flashing that same rehearsed smile. Ryan, I just needed to talk to you. Karen. I kept my distance, crossing my arms. We talked, remember? At the cafe? I was pretty clear. Her smile faltered, and she held out the envelope. Just read this, please. I didn't take it. What is it? Just read it, she pleaded, her voice shaking. For your father's sake. My blood went cold at the mention of Dad. She knew exactly which buttons to push, but I wasn't falling for it. Leave it on the ground, I said, my voice flat. And go. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but she just nodded, her eyes downcast. She placed the envelope gently by my door and walked away without another word. I waited until she was out of sight before picking it up. The trap, I tossed the envelope onto the kitchen counter and stared at it for a while, debating whether I should even open it. Part of me wanted to throw it straight in the trash, but curiosity won. Inside, I found a thick stack of papers, legal documents. I skimmed through them, and my stomach dropped. She wasn't asking for money. She was demanding it. Buried in the paperwork was a petition for financial assistance, citing some obscure family obligation clause. It was a long shot, but if she dragged me into court, it could turn into a legal nightmare. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just asking for help, she was trying to force me. My hands clenched around the papers, my pulse pounding in my ears. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This was a game, and if Karen wanted to play, I'd play, but I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. I spent the next few days talking to lawyers, making sure every angle was covered. I had built my life too carefully to let Karen tear it apart now. The legal fees were nothing compared to the satisfaction of knowing I was bulletproof. But I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to end this once and for all. The final move, Karen didn't expect me to fight back. She thought I'd fold, like I had when I was a scared teenager with nowhere to go. But that kid was gone, and in his place was a man who had built an empire from the ashes she left behind. I called her the next week. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with fake concern. Ryan! I knew you'd come around, she cooed. I didn't, I said bluntly, but I wanted to give you one last chance. Silence. Drop the petition, Karen, I said calmly. Walk away. For good. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure you regret it. Her tone shifted instantly, the sweetness replaced by a defensive edge. You wouldn't do that to your own family. Family? I let out a bitter laugh. You threw me out, Karen. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She started to argue, but I cut her off. You try to take me to court? I said, my voice deadly calm. I'll make sure every skeleton you've buried comes crawling out. Every shady deal, every lie, every manipulative game. You'll lose more than just this case. You'll lose everything. Silence. Do you understand me? I asked, my patience wearing thin. Fine, she snapped, her voice laced with bitterness. But you'll regret this, Ryan. No, I said softly. You will. Closing the door for good, the petition disappeared the next day. My lawyer confirmed that Karen had quietly withdrawn it, probably realizing I wasn't bluffing. I half expected another attempt, a desperate last-ditch effort, but there was nothing, just silence. And for the first time in years, that silence felt peaceful. I stood in my loft that evening, staring out at the city skyline. The lights glittered like stars, a reminder of how far I'd come. I'd built this life with my own hands, no help, no safety net, just grit and sheer will. Karen had tried to claw her way back in, but I'd slammed the door shut. And this time, it was locked for good. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I landed on one name, Dad. The contact was still there, even after all these years. I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I tapped on it, just staring at the screen for a moment before whispering softly, I did it, Dad, I murmured. I made it. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted just a little. I could almost hear his voice, full of pride and warmth. I always knew you would. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. Karen was gone. The past was finally behind me. And the future? It was mine. Epilogue. A new chapter. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't realized I craved. My agency was thriving, expanding faster than I'd ever imagined. I hired a small team of people who shared my drive and passion. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that would last. And Karen, she stayed quiet. For once in her life, she'd finally learned that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. One evening, as I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer below, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage, the hurt, it had fueled me for so long. But now, it was gone, replaced by something better, peace. I had won, not by destroying her, but by rising so far above the ashes that her shadow couldn't touch me anymore. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, letting the warmth spread through me, to the life I had built, to the man I had become, and to the future one where I was finally free.